إذا متت مع أمي كان أحسن ما أشوف يعني العذاب هذا والمر هذا اللي بشوفه، المأساة هذه اللي بشوفها، اللي كل حاجة عندي كليتهم يعني كل اللي كنت أعزهم وأحبهم كليتهم راحوا.
The International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian People, an occasion to reiterate our support to the Palestinians' right to peace and freedom.
Palestine, Jannah waits for your innocent lives. Palestine, Palestine, we'll be free, yeah, Palestine, we'll be free, yeah, Palestine. Oh, believe it.
بيوقف إطلاق النار عنا، يرحلوا عنا. إحنا إنت مش عايشين في أمان، إحنا عايشين في حصار. إحنا لو متنا أحسن، أنا لو متت ما شفتش الحياة اللي بتشوفيها. كل الموت والإصابات والجرحى، بفتح التلفزيون ما لاقيش إلا تشييع جنازات ولا قصف ولا دبابات.
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome on Radio Algeria International for a special program on the occasion of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian People. This year, we're celebrating this day amid a complex and difficult situation for Palestinians as the Israeli genocidal aggression against Gaza is continuing. The UN Security Council is still striving for a ceasefire deal, and the Israeli occupation is trying to sustain its propaganda waged by the mainstream media against the Palestinian cause for decades now. The Palestinian death toll from the Israeli onslaught since October 2023 has risen to 44,300 reported fatalities, and the repercussions of hunger in the Gaza Strip reached critical levels, which makes a ceasefire urgent more than before. And to talk more about this special day and about the latest developments of the situation, we have with us in our studio political analyst Mr. Ismail Dabbish. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. So we'll be joined later by human rights lawyer and law expert Mrs. Frances Boyle from Chicago, and South African Deputy Minister and President of Al Jamah Party Mr. Ghani F. Hendricks from Cape Town, and political analyst Mr. Abdel Noor Toumi from Paris. Mr. Dabbish, now, as I said, this year unfortunately was another year of bloodshed for Palestinians, in addition to Israeli attempts to hamper all kinds of support to them by, for instance, banning the UNRWA, demonizing all reactions and demonstrations in favor of the Palestinians to keep isolating them. What are the acts of solidarity that the Palestinian people need right now, urgently, and is pushing for a ceasefire the main one right now?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First, we must not say special Palestinian Day. Every day is a Palestinian Day.
Of course.
And we shouldn't only say for the last year, for the last 70 years. I mean, the bloodshed, as you said earlier, is every day, has been every day for the last 70 years. Criminal acts by the so-called Israel has been for 70 years. Thousands, millions of Palestinians killed, and Arabs as well for the for Arab-Israeli wars. 48, 56, 67, 1967 and 1973, and all wars. So that means it's a problem, not only a Palestinian problem, it's an Arab and a human problem, international problem. So to me, I think before we ask for the ceasefire, we have to have an answer of those Arab countries and those Muslim countries claiming that Palestinian is their cause. But in the field, we don't see that. With the exception of Algeria, most of Arab countries, Muslim countries, in the field have different views and different acts. Thanks to Algeria, which could divert or at least postpone or freeze Arab and Islamic offensive positive approach to the so-called Israel. Before the crimes, the intensive crimes by Israel for the last year against the Palestinians, most Arab countries, the Gulf states, all of them were going to establishing diplomatic relations with the so-called Israel.
Well, exactly, Mr. Depesh. Allow me to interrupt you. One of the fortunate coincidences in such an unfortunate context is that Algeria's mandate at the UN Security Council coincided with the escalation of the Israeli aggression on Gaza. How did this fact help in putting the Palestinian cause at the center of the Security Council?
I think, luckily enough for the Palestinians, Algeria is there.
Yeah.
And it will be there for at least another year. Which means Algeria, the first time in the Security Council of the United Nations, experiencing a country that put forward cases, causes, especially the Palestinian cause, and imposed on them to adopt solutions wouldn't have been adopted if it wasn't Algerian there, if Algeria was not there. I mean, the United States always used the veto against any solution that negatively affect the so-called Israel. But Algeria was able for the last year and a half to impose, even on the United States, to consider Israel as a country trying to eradicate human existence. That was the first time in the history of the Security Council, and the United Nations abstained, did not use the veto. That means United States was embarrassed, was not being able. Of course, there was other allies for Algeria, China, Russia, and some other countries in the Security Council.
But do you think that the veto is or led to losing the credibility of the UN Security Council?
Well, I think why when we say veto, why America has the ability to exercise the veto? Because if other countries do not obey with American will or wishes, that means they will be punished because they have strong economic relations with the United States and the West in general. That was a decade ago, but it is no longer now, because there are other countries which have stronger relations with countries have the vetoes like China and Russia. So the veto no longer have the strength as it used by the United States a few years ago. I give you an example. Saudi Arabia was almost dependent on the Western economy. Now Saudi Arabia has $200 billion of economic relations with China. That means Saudi Arabia was considered as an ally of the West, now is diverting from the West. So now the United States can't easily impose its veto on other countries because it doesn't have that economic strength that it used to have years ago.
You mean it's not as strong as it used to be before?
No longer the United States can impose its will on other countries as it did, especially since the disintegration of the socialist bloc.
Okay, so now let's seek legal viewpoints from the first lawyer to win a case at the ICJ regarding the case of Bosnia-Herzegovina, the human rights lawyer and law expert, Mrs. Frances Boyle, who is joining us from Chicago. Mr. Boyle, thank you so much for being with us. The International Criminal Court finally issued arrest warrants against Netanyahu and his former defense minister. This came after long months of battles at the ICJ for different cases related to the Palestinian people suffering. How far could the ICC's decision serve the Palestinian cause, and how do you see the case process of or at the ICJ?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for having me on Radio Algeria, and the best to all my friends there in Algeria. Well, my reaction to the indictments by the ICC of Netanyahu and Gallant is better late than never. Your listeners must understand that after Operation Cast Lead in 2009, I personally advised the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to accept the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, which he did. And for the last 15 years, the ICC did absolutely nothing to help the Palestinians. Nothing. And I believe that all the death and destruction that we have seen inflicted on the Palestinians for the past 15 years by Israel is in part the responsibility of the ICC. If they had acted 15 years ago, maybe this latest round of genocide against the Palestinians could have been avoided. That being said, as I said before, better late than never, it is important that Netanyahu and Gallant have been indicted and now the arrest warrants issued because now the entire world understands that this is a criminal regime running Israel today. There are arrest warrants against the prime minister and the recent defense minister who was just fired for war crimes and crimes against humanity, which in terms of severity, crimes against humanity is just short of genocide.
Of course. Well, finally, we have that now. But Mr. Boyle, do you see a split in the European position towards Palestine amid the wave of recognitions of the state of Palestine?
To give you a comparison, as I think many of you know, I was the lawyer for the Republic of Bosnia and Herzegovina during the war and genocide against them. Starting in early March 1992, that genocide commenced. It did not end until the last week of August 1995. There were 200,000 exterminated Bosnian Muslims during that period. Well, we have 200,000 exterminated Palestinians now in 1 year, as opposed to the other case 3 years, 3.5 years. So this is astounding what has been done here between you and me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Francis Boyle, for joining us from Chicago. Now back to you, to my guest in the studio, Mr. Ismail Dabish, and back to our talk about the Security Council. How would you describe the performance of the UN Security Council with the situation in Gaza, in the West Bank and the Middle East in general? And is it high time for reform, something that Algeria has been advocating for quite a long time now?
We must define the Palestinian cause actually. I think it was well defined and determined by President Abdelmajid Tebboune during the last Arab summit in Algeria, and during when he gathered all the Palestinians to be one united against Israel. Unfortunately, the Palestinians have not reached the approach of the President Abdelmajid Tebboune, and they still divided. They don't have a united approach to the situation in Israel, in Palestine for the last year. Whereas the Israelis, with all their different convictions, political differences, opposition, all of them, one united against the International Criminal Court trying to prosecute Netanyahu. Mm-hmm. So you see the contrasting things. The Israelis are one people, one united, one attitude, and the other side, Palestinians, still divided. So the first thing, before we talk about forces supporting Palestinians or other countries, other peoples, other human organizations, we have to see Palestinians united as one unit against Israel. And fourth, as President Tebboune said yesterday, we have to establish we have the same attitude, the same position, a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem, the capital.
Of course, within
We
the
still
1967 borders.
don't have such approach and strong Palestinian issue. I think Algeria is trying to push the Palestinians, Arab countries, Muslim countries, and the world towards such a direction. Now, Security Council is an administration, but reflects great powers, reflects members of the Security Council, and those are from the UN Assembly, which means that they are countries, and those countries had different positions. Now, how we make these people impose on them to stand behind the Palestinians and not to stand behind the so-called Israel? We have a lot of factors we can use. The first factor, the economic factor. We have seen Spain, how it was the ally of the so-called Israel and diverted to be the ally of Palestinians by recognizing the existence of the Palestinian state.
Yeah.
We have seen a lot of European countries as well.
Like Norway,
That
Ireland.
means Arab countries, Muslim countries, the world must use the economic factor. We have to get the South African experience when they were against apartheid. They could mobilize forces, countries, parties, political parties, organizations behind their cause through economic sanctions. So, through the economic sanctions, I think it's a very big element, as you to answer your question, to influence, to stand behind the Palestinian cause. The other factor, what is it? We should get out from this dogmatic speech. We for Palestine, we against the criminal Netanyahu, etc., to go to actions. I mean, we see the so-called system of Morocco in the speech pretend that he's the president of the Jerusalem Commission for Palestinian, but in the end, and in fact,
Of course, we're still listening to Radio Algeria International. Now, Mr. Debesh, can the international community at least impose a decision to prevent all kinds of restrictions against allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza?
Again, I think we have to use our influence, the Arab countries, starting by Egypt. Egypt, for its interests, for its national security, for its sovereignty, it has to let all economic aid, food aid, and why not military aid to go to the Palestinians. Why? Because the Palestinians are not only fighting for their cause in Gaza, but as well as they're fighting for Egypt.
But don't
Excuse
you think
me,
that
I have to say this. I have to
Yes.
finish this word.
Yes, go ahead.
Because if the so-called Israel succeeded in annexing Gaza, the strip of Gaza, that means they were starting constructing Ben Gurion Canal, which
believe that this is the aim?
is planned to go through Gaza, which means Suez Canal no longer will be important because there is another canal. So it means Palestinians are fighting for Egypt. The second thing is, if the so-called Israel succeeded in Gaza, that means we'll throw away and the Palestinians in Sinai. And then we come to all the project, we make a state of Palestine in Sinai. That means the Palestinians are fighting for Egypt.
Do you think that this is the final aim of the Israeli occupation with what's happening in Gaza? And we're happy to know that the ceasefire was finally signed for Lebanon, but was it the aim of the Israeli occupation from these aggressions?
No, I think it's an accusation for the Lebanese resistance. I think that I heard this morning the Hezbollah spokesman said we will continue supporting the resistance in Gaza by all means, and what we did, we saved Lebanon from Israeli aggression. And I heard as well Iran insisting that we will continue supporting the resistance. I think we can't separate the Lebanese issue from the Palestinian issue. So that's why I think the resistance will succeed in the end. It has its own supporters, so supporters whether from different forces in the region,
Of course, yeah.
or from inside. So if they have been able to continue resisting, now almost reaching the second year of the Palestinian resistance, I think the Israeli has failed to maintain their own objectives, because Egypt itself will not tolerate the so-called Israel
Thank you for your
to undermine
thank you
Egyptian
for these
borders.
Thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt you, but we cannot talk about solidarity with the Palestinian people without mentioning South Africa, whose support is historic and unwavering with Palestinians. We just talked to Mr. Francis Boyle about South Africa's case at the ICJ, which led to the decisions of the ICC. And now we are joined from Cape Town by South African Deputy Minister and President of Al Jamah Party, Mr. Ghaniev Hendricks. Hello on Radio Algeria International. Can you hear me, Mr. Hendricks? You still listen to Radio Algeria International. We'll try to reach out later. Now, can you hear me, Mr. Hendricks? We're back to Cape Town. Mr. Hendricks, can you hear me?
I'm on standby.
Yes. So in a previous interview, you told me that South Africa's case against the Israeli occupation at the ICJ is not an act of solidarity, but a responsibility of the signatories of the Geneva Convention. The case started to bear fruit, especially with the arrest warrants issued for Netanyahu and his former defense minister. What is South Africa's next step or expectation in line with its battle at the ICJ?
Yeah, thank you very much. As you know, South Africa has prepared very well for both cases. We one in connection with the Convention on Genocide, and the other one where the war crimes are being committed. So we have already submitted the paperwork, and our advocates and legal eagles are ready to start presenting the case and answering any questions that may arise. We feel very confident that our case will succeed and that the criminals will be convicted, and also that Israel will be guilty of one of the worst cases of genocide.
Hopefully.
As you know, South Africa also signed the Convention on Apartheid. We are already in South Africa busy with a bill in Parliament to punish those who support Israel and support apartheid. So we are very serious about human rights. We are very serious about the conventions that we signed. And we feel that South Africa must take the lead, because we suffered apartheid for many years. And we understand the harshness of apartheid. And we also understand how cruel apartheid is. And we can see in that Israel are perpetuating the worst form of apartheid that one can ever imagine. So in South Africa, because I was not white, since a child, we had to suffer under apartheid. We then decided to go on a struggle. We used to protest. That didn't work. We then went on armed struggle. And then in the end, we got the settlement where the whites stepped down. And we have a one man, one vote system in South Africa. We feel that there are two options for the Palestinians, a two-state solution or one man, one vote from the river to the sea. It is up to Palestinians to decide what is the best option for them, although we find that in South Africa, the one man, one vote is working very well. But maybe that is not possible in Palestine. So we are very confident going forth. We are celebrating International Palestine Day. And at the moment, we have a double approach. We're using the international courts, and we are also keeping the struggle of Palestine alive. We are busy renaming one of the most important streets in South Africa called Santon Drive to Leila Khalid Drive. Leila Khalid was a great liberation fighter, but more important, she's associated with the struggle of the Palestinians. So while her name is on the street, it reminds us of the struggle in Palestine, especially the women and children.
Of course. Mr. Hendricks, is it high time for the world to see through the lenses of South Africa, of Algeria, of countries that have been through the same barbarity and understand that granting Palestinians the right to set up a state is the only way to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
No, we agree fully with you. It is unfortunate that we do have a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the very countries that helped prepare that declaration and are supposed to be the custodians are the first one to tear it to pieces. So they are not part of the civilized modern world anymore. They've gone back to centuries ago where we had the most cruel people living on this planet. And that's why we need a new civilization. And we find that by South Africa going to the international courts, we are taking the lead to show the world that if there are disputes, take it to the international courts, especially when it comes to humanitarian matters. And if you want to call yourself a civilized human being, and there are disputes, and that is where it must be resolved. But to resolve disputes by killing women and children is the most barbaric acts that can be committed. We know that the Jews suffered under Hitler, and even after 100 years, people are still talking about it. With what the Israelis are doing to Palestine, people will talk about it until the day of judgment, because it is so bad. The world has never imagined that there are such cruel human beings who call them civilized. And that's why my political party, Al Jamaa, has submitted to the South African Parliament a bill called the Apartheid Complicity Bill. So those who support Israel, they support apartheid, and in terms of the law, they must face a harsh punishment, since South Africa has signed the Convention on Apartheid and punishment for those who promote apartheid. And countries like America, France, Germany are all supporting Israel, and they are guilty of violating the Convention on Apartheid. Even in our own parliament, we have mostly whites that are supporting Israel. They are very open about it. They send their children to come and fight in Israel. They teach their children at school when they matriculate to go to Israel and support now the genocide.
Indeed, Mr.
And
Hendricks.
it's very sad that the world has come to this.
Yeah, without the help of these allies, Israel wouldn't have ventured with all its aggressions in the Middle East.
Yeah, look, it is Israel has not obeyed one single decision of the United Nations because they are supported by America's veto. And if there is a resolution in the United Nations, there must be enforcement. You can't vote in favor of humanity and then not enforce it. But the world is unable to enforce it because of the military might of America. And then countries like China and Russia, they need to step up the game. And they are our only hope for a humanitarian world, for a new civilization, because at the moment there is no civilization in the world. You have countries like Algeria, like South Africa, maybe one or two other countries that are sincere about human rights, about self-determination, but the rest of the world, just because it's Israel supported by America, they have suddenly become barbarians, savage people that no one will respect. History will not respect the people of the world of 2024.
Absolutely.
And that's why Algeria can hold its head up high, and South Africa, that we are some of the few countries that still have a heart, that are humanitarians, that are civilized.
Of course.
The rest of the world are uncivilized.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Hendricks, for joining us from Cape Town. Thank you so much for being with us on Radio Algeria International. Now, Mr. Debish, do you agree with our South African guest who said that the Israeli allies are the cause of what's happening now in the Middle East because they keep supporting the entity?
Unfortunately, not only Western allies, even Arab allies. Morocco is the ally of Israel. And my colleague in South Africa knows very well Morocco was supporting Israel, and Morocco and Israel supported the apartheid system in South Africa against the INC. He's very well informed about this. So the system of Morocco is an Arab country, and there are other countries, Islamic countries, which have the same position, thanks to Algeria, which discovered all their complicities with the so-called Israel. Now, a lot of Arab countries, a lot of Muslim countries, we have seen them in the last summit, Arab Islamic summit in Riyadh last week, all at least formally confirmed their stance for the state of Palestine and with its capital, the east of Jerusalem, thanks to Algeria. I think what should be happening now, countries like South Africa, Algeria, Latin American countries, Russia, China, have to create a forum together concerning only the Palestinian state. And if they form such a coordination for Palestinian issue against the criminality of the so-called Israel, that means a lot of countries will join them, even some countries from Europe. We have to make initiatives. That's why, for example, our Minister of Foreign Affairs yesterday or 2 days ago, he was able
to kick out the Israeli minister.
He was able to kick out the ex-minister of Foreign Affairs of the so-called Israel in Portugal. Thanks to Algeria. That means we have to create, I wouldn't say an alliance, at least a coordination among those countries which have a human and political stance against criminality of the so-called Israel. I think if we do this, we will create a forum within the international organizations to be joined We have 130 countries in the world. 80% of them stand behind Palestine. Only a few, some Europeans, America, etc. So if we make such a pressures, in addition to people, members in the Security Council and the veto countries, we really can do something for the Palestinians.
Hopefully.
That's why we see now the so-called, we would never dream that the so-called Israeli authorities, prime minister, ministers, would be punished by the criminal court.
Finally, after
Would
months of
never
battle.
give a space for such and we would never dream that some European countries stand behind such a decision. That
Exactly.
means Israel is facing a very dark situation. We have to double our efforts to make the Palestinian cause sound, because the people now in the world understand very well that the Israelis do not believe in the state of Palestine.
Exactly,
We have
Mr.
to
Dabbash,
impose
yeah.
it on them.
Yeah, to talk exactly about this support, we'll go to our political analyst, Mr. Abdelnour Toumi, who is joining us from Paris. Mr. Toumi, thank you for being with us. Can you hear me?
Yes, I do. Good morning, and thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you so much.
And my greeting to your distinguished guest and the auditor as well.
Thank you. So, Mr. Toumi, the escalation of the situation in Palestine, notably expanding Jewish settlements in the West Bank and killing and displacing Gazans, brought back the Palestinian cause to the center of the international scene and made it visible more than ever before. Many European countries recognized Palestine as a state. In 2024, we have seen Palestine strongly present at parliamentary debates in the EU, in the UK, even in the US Congress. We have seen massive and unprecedented pro-Palestine demonstrations around the world as well. Can we say that solidarity with the Palestinian people gained momentum this year?
Actually, it does, and all this happened on that day of the act of resistance on October 7, 2023. And that led by the operation of Al-Aqsa flood. And it is, in fact, was a huge flooding that did bring back the Palestinian legitimate cause, in which just days before that, in October 7, 2023, actually, the world has even, was barely speaking about Palestinian cause. And even if there is a cause, and unfortunately, this narrative was bought also by the Arab elite. I'm not making this generalization, but it was to some extent did by into the quote-unquote Abraham Accords and a process of, I don't like this term of normalization, but I will add, with all my respect, of capitulation to the Zionists and to the Zionist agenda in the region and to its minions. So what happened afterwards, there is now actually a solid and a strong solidarity with the and mobility, like I'm going to use the term in Arabic, Hirak, and actually an international Hirak.
Yeah, or demonstrations or wave.
Indeed, actually, no, mobility in terms
Exactly.
of showing full support for the Palestinians and people and the Palestinian cause. Therefore, the Palestinians have the right to live in peace and dignity. Whereas the narrative of the Zionist colonial state and its outmatch and disproportionate reaction to the flood, Al-Aqsa flood operation, that, it's still going, and it's not war anymore. It's a carnage that is taking place, actually, with the help of the Americans, the Biden administration, and also the complicit of Western countries, in which they were again like making the senseless parallel between the war on terror, and we know the consequences of this war and how this again narrative was buried in Afghanistan. But when Biden administration did withdraw from Afghanistan was laden, and we saw that with France in the Sahel and so on. So the main point here, there is now full support and serious awareness for the Palestinian people, for the Palestinian cause, in which actually that it didn't start on October 7th. Their tragedy has been going on for 7 decades, and this is why today their resilience and the resistance in Gaza is in fact it is an imperative paradigm in this conflict in the region that has been eating up the stability and the security for the region. There is an interesting point I would like to make here, because the Zionists and the Zionist states have been, again, worried about security and talking about security, but they never talked about the stability and peace, because they don't believe in neither peace nor stability. And we saw how, again, they keep, annexing territories in the West Bank and entire
Mr. Toomey, the Israeli occupation keeps labeling all kinds of support and solidarity with Palestine as anti-Semitic. Is this Israeli argument still convincing as strong as it used to be before in Western countries and for Western peoples in particular?
And again, it is senseless. It doesn't make any sense. And again, this is the narrative of the Zionists and their minions in the media, in the Western media, who keep kind of like trying to silence or side the just, the righteous, the people who are saying enough, it's enough. And there are many Jewish who are against the carnage is taking place in Gaza, and even the latest war in Lebanon. So, and again, what's going on again, the carnage, and I insist on the word carnage because it's not a war anymore, it's a carnage, and let's call the names by their names as they are. So this is why, again, these Zionists and the Zionist colonial state administration is in a panic mode, because they know that there is, again, a truth, and the truth is coming out of Gaza and about their, ethnic cleansing policy and the genocide that is taking place. And more importantly, and what happened just last week with the ICC decision, to again launch a warrant arrest against the war criminal Netanyahu and his former defense minister. So all this, again, development, there is a shift in the trajectory of the Palestinian rights and dignity to establish and to live freely on their land and establish their statehood.
Mr. Toomey, to talk more about support to the Palestinian people, did social media contribute to revealing the atrocities endured by Palestinians on the ground despite the censorship imposed on pro-Palestine content?
I didn't hear very well the last part of the question. I'm sorry.
Well, I said, did social media contribute to revealing the real atrocities endured by Palestinians on the ground, and this despite the censorship imposed on pro-Palestine content?
It is, in fact, and this tool of communication, of postmodern tool of communication, is playing a major role. Nonetheless, it is, in fact, showing its kind of harsh control and, as you said, censorship against the writers who are speaking up for the Palestinians and saying enough is enough. And what is taking place in Gaza is not war. And again, it's a carnage. But on the other hand, I mean, there are solid and strong voices who are, again, making noise and speaking up without fear and challenging, in fact, the establishment, media, politicians in the West, and including those platforms, because they control those platforms. So, and it's still kind of, I won't say a drop in the ocean, but in fact, it is minor, but they are making noises, and they are, in fact, showing their strength via their protests and weekly protests in Western capitals, notably in France, in the UK, even in the US and Northern European countries, Scandinavian countries, and not to mention, of course, Italy and Spain and so on. So all these, and even in South America and even in Africa, and we saw the position of South Africa. I mean, it is, again, with Algeria. I mean, those two countries who have been a strong voice for the Palestinians for decades. So all this is creating, in fact, this kind of, I would say, rivalry between the North and the South, what we are calling it nowadays, commonly in international relations, between the global South and the global North. But what is important and interesting in the global North is, again, there is a new generation of youth and elite who are not buying all the
narrative of the Western media.
Leaders, again, narrative, and also the propaganda of their media.
Thank you so much, Mr. Toumi. You've joined us from Paris. Now back to my guest, Mr. Ismail Dabash. Do you agree with Mr. Toumi? Do you see that in Europe there is, or the Palestinian cause, not only in Europe but in Western countries in general, gained momentum this year?
Yes. Yes, I absolutely agree with Mr. Toumi. We have to know that the Palestinian cause for the last year has become a sounding cause in the West in general. Not only as used to do at the human organizations and public opinion, but at the official level, parliaments, governments, official authorities, including in the United States. We have seen
political debates.
How we have seen some people resigned from the White House in the United States because of the United States support for the for the so-called Israel. So that means the development there is a great change now. The problem now, we have to keep on going, making, because the Western people have become to feel they are the objective of the Zionist state as a whole. Anything they want to say, you say you are against Semitism. Anything that now
Do you think that this argument is as strong as it used to be before?
No, they refuse it now. The public opinion in Europe, the official people in Europe, they refuse it. To the extent the governments, usually loyal to the so-called Israel, are in a very weak position towards their people who elected them. And they will pay the price. Can you imagine? A state like France is prisoned by the Zionist state, by the colonialist mind state people, to take some decisions against the wishes of their people. The people demonstrate against the French state. The people demonstrated against the European governments. But their governments take position behind Israel.
In their name.
Some governments who have been able to comply with their people, like Spanish government, maybe Belgium government, maybe
Ireland.
I will see some other governments in the West as a whole. So that means there is something going on against the so-called Israel. If that's why I propose for the countries strongly supporting human cause, I won't say Palestine, human cause as a whole, to make a forum. Not only every time we have an economic forum, a diplomat, we have a forum for human causes. Because when we solve such a problem, that means we'll lead the world to multilateralism. The world no longer will be dominated by unipolar system of the United States. If we want to do this, I have given I'm going to Paris to give such an argument. We have to form some gathering of countries, of organization, of people, representative to campaign, not necessarily only for Palestine, for the interest of all the people in the world, because all the people in the world became victims of the Zionist and imperialist and colonialist in mind, including European people, including Western people.
No one is spared their atrocities.
So that's why I think time is ripe to form such gathering. I think Algeria has already expressed its position consequently and has succeeded in doing so by succeeding at the UN Assembly, accepting Palestine as a full member in the United Nations. That's something because started in Algeria and we found a lot of support from South Africa, a lot of support from other countries. Now Palestine is a country, whereas Israel now is being under consideration of expanding it, because a lot of countries, they're asking, you have to expel Israel from the United Nations because it has not been obeyed by the United Nations principles, laws, organizations. So that at the time when Palestine is gaining more influence in the United States, the so-called Israel is gaining more negative consequences. So that's why it's up to us to form such a forum to press. I was in the United Nations. I found a lot of people following the Algerian stance and wanted to do so.
Thank you so much, Mr. Debish. I will take this hour as your final word on this occasion. As our time is up, I'm afraid. I would like to thank all the guests who joined us as well for this special program from different parts of the world. The South African Deputy Minister, Mr. Galiaf Hendricks, Mr. Tumi Abdelnour from Paris, and also, of course, lawyer Francis Boyle. Thank you, Mr. Debish, again, for accepting our invitation for celebrating the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian People with Radio Algeria International. Thank you, dear listeners, for your ears. I would like to end this program with a quote by Nelson Mandela, who said, "Our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of Palestinians." I would say we will keep standing by the Palestinians until they obtain their freedom. Goodbye.